Hello, coming to you from the tough city of board gaming, Omaha, Nebraska. Welcome to the Out of the Dust podcast. I'm your host, Buff Bryce. Tied in with the popular recurring Out of the Dust geek list on Board Game Geek, the Out of the Dust podcast is a weekly podcast that is focused on re-exploring games we played that we hadn't previously played in a year or more. Why did the game get dusty? Why did you decide to dust it off? How does the game compare to how you remembered it? Are you likely to play it more often in the future? These are the questions that we're interested in examining on Out of the Dust. This week on the podcast, episode 44. On the Out of the Dust segment, I'll bring Francis Drake out of the dust, and a contributor will dust off both Sekigahara and Red 7. On the reaction segment, I discuss Plan B's announcement of new Golem editions for all the Century games. On the What I've Been Playing segment, I review Copenhagen. On the Obscure Bryce game segment, I review Helios. And we wrap up the episode by starting my top 5 Table Hog Games countdown. I had a chance to bring Francis Drake out of the dust recently. Designed by Peter Hawes of Triassic Terror fame, and published by Eagle Gryphon in 2013, Francis Drake is a very unique worker placement game. I last played it 3 years, 7 months, and 2 days ago. I played this at my friend Peter's birthday party, which was the same occasion where I learned Nauticus, which I mentioned on a previous episode. It actually wound up being a dusty play for all 3 players. We all agreed this game holds up well. It's another example of how excellent 2013 was for enduring board games. I especially like the action selection mechanism in this game, using a street of actions that players travel down placing their workers. It's a mechanic that has only popped up a few times in other games since Francis Drake's release, but has usually turned out well. We unanimously agreed to randomize the street action tiles each round, which I think is the best way to play. I'm always a fan of the sort of adaptive strategy something like that encourages. We also played with the mini expansions, which none of us had used before, but which wound up being easy additions and create a little bit more variety for the secret information portion of the game. After this successful Out of the Dust play, I'm hopeful that Francis Drake hits the table again soon. I own the 2-player expansion and wouldn't mind trying that out sometime. Let's see what a contributor brought Out of the Dust. Jerome, username Czar, brought a couple of interesting games out of the dust recently. First was Sekigahara, The Unification of Japan, a 2011 GMT war game set in feudal Japan from designer Matt Calkins. Sekigahara is one of the top 10 highest-ranked war games on BGG. Matt last played it 7 years, 4 months, and 17 days ago, and currently rates it a 7 out of 10. He writes, "Had this game until 2014 and played it only twice. Then, suddenly, a friend stood at my doorstep with Sekigahara in his backpack. I'm more or less out of war games, but I have to admit that I enjoyed the thrill while also annoyed at myself for not seeing consequences of rules and victory conditions. I did pretty well, but on hindsight screwed up in the very first turn. My opponent screwed up several situations as well, so kudos to him. And gratitude for bringing this game along. I'd play it again. I don't think that will happen anytime soon, though. Rating remains a 7. Next up was Red 7, the popular 2014 Asmati card game from card game expert designers Karl Chudyk and Chris Seislik. Matt last played it 1 year, 9 months, and 13 days ago, and currently rates it a 7 out of 10 as well. He writes, I've been buying a couple of card games and remembered that Red 7 was fun, but also too luck-dependent. A quick check at my Geek Buddy's notes taught me that the game comes alive when playing by the advanced rules, and so it did. I see many more plays coming in the near future, rating up from 6 to 7. Thanks for the contributions, Matt. I've never been a big war gamer, but Sekigahara is one I might give a try to if I ever happen to run into someone who knows it. The theme and the fact that it's not designed by Richard Berg is attractive to me. Reaction segment time. Well, what have we here? It's a press release from Plan B Games formally announcing the imminent release of Eastern Mountains, the Golem edition of Century Eastern Wonders. Once Plan B started waffling on their hardline stance of not going to happen, and started saying things like, we're considering it, you knew it was only a matter of time before it actually did happen. Listeners might recall I originally made a failed prediction that this would be announced by the end of 2018, which makes this announcement 6 months late for my original prediction. But listeners will also recall I renewed that prediction for 2019, speculating they would announce it after the release of Century New World. And announce it they have! Since Century New World has only been released at Origins and hasn't had a widespread retail release yet, this announcement is actually a little earlier than I expected. I thought they'd probably let Century New World establish a sales history first, but in any event, the entire Century series is being golemized now. I had some good-natured fun going through some old threads on the subject of Eastern Wonders, and if it was going to get a Golem edition or not, and calling people out on their silliness for thinking the publisher wasn't ever going to change their mind. Most amusingly, I found a year-old thread from when Eastern Wonders was first released, where I commented my belief that Eastern Wonders would eventually get a Golem edition. Mike Young of Plan B Games himself responded to me with the comment, "Don't hold your breath." He got a laugh out of it when I tagged him on that thread the other day. But this reversal of the publisher's policy has generated some controversy. There's a vocal contingent of gamers who see this policy reversal as a betrayal. They had invested in Century Spice Road and Eastern Wonders under the belief that those would be the only way to enjoy the combination games of the series. They say that they would have bought the Golem edition instead if they had known all 3 Century games would eventually be Golemized. I don't have much sympathy for these people, though. When Plan B first went back on what they said and released Century Spice Road Golem Edition after they said they weren't going to, gamers who really liked the idea of the Golem Edition should have taken that as evidence that the company was willing to change their minds on a position. Now, admittedly, Plan B probably should never have said that they were never going to do something in the first place if there was even the slightest chance they would. But as other gamers have pointed out, the announcement of Eastern Mountains is also evidence that Plan B listens to its consumers and is willing to give them what they want. I think that's a much more reasonable and positive position to take on this matter. Besides, with a game as popular as the Century series, it should be easy enough to trade or sell existing copies of Spice Road and Eastern Wonders to invest in the Golem editions instead if one chooses to do so. As for myself, I actually prefer the historical themes and I'm quite satisfied hanging on to my already complete trilogy of Century games. My friend Chad picked up a new world for me at Origins, and I'm planning an epic demo of all 7 base and combination games at the local board game cafe in July, one right after the other. The important thing to take away from this announcement is that good times are ahead for fans of both Century and Century Golem. This week on the What I've Been Playing segment, I'm going to tell you about Copenhagen, the new tile laying game from designers Asger Harding Granerud and Daniel Skjold Peterson, and publisher Queen Games. This was on Kickstarter earlier in the year and has already been fulfilled. A lot of people have had issues with Queen Games Kickstarters in the past, but I think their recent track record of quick turnarounds, beautiful productions, improved communication, and some of the most consistently excellent rulebooks around warrants people giving them another look if they've written them off before. I think they've redeemed themselves. I'm a big Queen Kickstarter fan right now. Copenhagen is yet another Polyonimo-style tile placement game. In this one, players are constructing buildings using the tiles. There are 5 colors of tiles and a deck of cards corresponding to them. On a player's turn, they can either draft new cards from the display or play cards to add a tile to their building. The card display is a semicircle of cards, and players can draft 2 adjacent ones. With a tight hand size limit of 7 cards, players find themselves trading in cards for tiles often. Each Polyonimo tile is composed of a certain number of squares, and the quantity of squares corresponds to the number of same-colored cards a player must pay for it. There are just a few tile placement rules, but it is very Tetris-like, requiring players to start from the bottom of their board and work upwards. Players score points for each horizontal row and vertical column they complete, and earn double points if the row or column is composed entirely of windows. The game ends once or twice through the card deck, depending on player count. The game can also end immediately if a player gets to 12 points. This game moves very briskly, and the game ended a lot sooner than I was expecting the first time I played. Over several plays, neither my wife nor I managed to end the game via the 12-point threshold. We have always ended it via writing out of the deck instead, and haven't even come particularly close to the 12-point threshold. But my friend Peter has done it, so it's possible with a dedicated approach. And that seems to be the name of the game here. Unlike a Tetris-style game where it's desirable to fill up every row possible, the addition of the vertical column scoring means players can pick and choose which columns and rows they score. The addition of bonus tiles and special ability tiles that are unlocked when particular rows are completed or certain spaces are covered up gives players strategic options to pursue. The Queenies are solid as well. One of them adds multicolored tiles, which I'm not sold on, but the universal scoring bonus Queenie is solid, and I'm particularly fond of the clear tiles that can create windows on solid tile spaces already in play. I've been having a lot of fun with this game. Queen seems to have scored a lot of hits lately with quality family-weight games, and Copenhagen is just the latest example of that. Obscure Bryce Game segment time. This week on the segment, I'm going to tell you about Helios, a 2014 action drafting and tile placement game from designers Martin Kellenborg and Matthias Prinz, and publisher Z-Man Games. The game made a bit of a splash when it released, thanks mostly to its attractive artwork from artist Dennis Lahazen of Terra Mystica and Feast for Odin fame, but it has become more and more obscure since then. Both designers have a handful of other credits, but Helios is actually their most owned and highest ranked game. True to typical Z-Man form, the game has never been reprinted, and it is racking up less than 20 log plays a month currently, despite being available to be played for free on Yakata. Here's how it works. Players are high priests of a sun god. To accomplish their worship, players draft action tiles to either place new terrain on their world, build a building, or rotate the sun around their planet. It's not a scientific game. These action tiles are arranged in 3 columns, and on their turn, a player can only draft one of the bottommost tiles. Additionally, the tiles come in 3 colors, and collecting a set of 4 light-colored tiles grants the player an extra bonus action. The terrain tiles give players resources, which are used to acquire buildings with the building action, and awaken personality tiles, which are acquired in between rounds. The personality tiles grant players different endgame scoring conditions. The buildings unlock special abilities, grant players advancements on their sun track, which determines how far their sun moves each time they draft that tile, yield mana stones, which are used to acquire the personality tiles, and erect temples, which grant bonus points each time the sun ends its movement next to them. Each time the sun completes an orbit, players score points. These in-game points, combined with the value of their buildings and the personality tiles they awaken, contribute to their endgame score. It's a very unique game. I particularly enjoy how the 3 actions tie together, and it's lots of fun crafting combos of special ability buildings and personality tiles. The constant weighing of whether to draft an action tile for its action or for its color is always an interesting one, as the very limited number of turns in a game makes the occasional bonus action extremely powerful. And yet, there's something that makes the game ultimately fall just a little short, and something that has led to its fall into obscurity. I believe the problem is the difficulty required for constructing temples in the game, which is one of the 2 things players can use the build action for. Each time the sun action is taken, players earn bonus points for each temple it ends its movement by. In theory, this can yield a lot of points over the course of the game, but temples can only be constructed on top of other tiles, which removes their resource production. And each temple constructed costs an additional resource to do so. In the end, while both mechanically and thematically the game cries out for temple building to be important, it's just more trouble than it's worth. The successful players in the games I've been part of have ignored this aspect entirely. That's a problem when a major element of a game isn't worthwhile for players to actually pursue. But at the same time, the rest of the game keeps drawing me back. The rest of the game is an attractive package with many rewarding elements. If any listeners want to learn the game sometime, feel free to reach out to me at Yakata via my user handle Silverberg14. A listener, Clay from Minneapolis, proposed a fun idea for a top 5 countdown. My top 5 Table Hog games. Games that take up a lot of room on the table. Coming in at number 5 would be Dinosaur Island, the 2017 game from publisher Pandasaurus and designers Jonathan Gilmore and Brian Lewis. This is a game I talked about recently in my top 5 favorite Kickstarters, as I was a backer of the original deluxe edition, but this time I will be discussing it from a completely different perspective. Because not only will I be talking about why I like these particular Table Hog games, but I will also be talking about why I think the space they take up is worth it. First of all, let's talk about how Dinosaur Island is a Table Hog, and I don't think anyone will dispute me on this one. We've got 3 central boards that all players use: the scoreboard, the worker placement board for the scientists, and the market board. In addition, there are 3 columns of cards and tiles that go next to the market board. And we need to leave space for piles of coins, enclosure tiles, the bag of visitors, all the different varieties of hot pink and blue expansion dino meeples, the objective cards, and the plot cards. All of this alone would be enough to qualify the game as a Table Hog, but we haven't even touched on the player areas yet. Each player needs not just 1, but 2 player boards, one